My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 28 years old, and tonight I'm going to tell you about the birthday that shattered everything I thought I knew about family. It was supposed to be a small celebration, nothing fancy, just dinner at my parents' place in a quiet suburb outside Boston. But what happened that night still echoes in my mind like a scar I can't erase. I had saved for months, putting away every spare dollar after paying rent and bills, until finally I bought something I had dreamed of since college, a high-end drawing tablet. $800. It wasn't just a gadget, it was the tool I believed would push my art to the next level. For once in my life, I was giving myself a gift that symbolized independence, passion, and growth. I remember setting the sleek box carefully on the passenger seat of my old Honda, wrapped in paper I'd picked out myself. I wasn't planning to open it at the dinner. No, this was something private, something sacred. My plan was to take it back to my apartment and open it slowly, savoring the moment. When I walked into my parents' home, everything felt routine. My dad was prepping the grill in the kitchen, my mom was setting the table with a distracted air, and my younger sister Sophie lounged on the couch, scrolling through her phone without looking up. They said the usual words, "Hey, birthday, boy." But their eyes weren't shining, and their smiles didn't linger. Dinner was bland conversation, revolving mostly around Sophie's sophomore year of college, her classes, her professors, her latest awards. I nodded politely, answering their token questions about my design work, though I could feel the disinterest in every clipped reply. But the real storm came after dessert. My father cleared his throat and gestured for my mother to bring out a package. I froze. The size, the shape, it was identical to the box sitting in my car outside. For the first time that night, I let myself believe maybe they had listened. Maybe they'd noticed how much I wanted this, and somehow they'd surprised me. "This is something special," my mom said, placing the gift carefully on the table. But instead of sliding it toward me, she pushed it across to Sophie. What I whispered, my voice hollow. "You don't deserve anything this year, Daniel," my father said with a casual wave of his hand, as if swatting away an annoying thought. "Sophie needs this tablet more than you. It will help with her design elective." In that split second, my world cracked open. Sophie tore the wrapping with eager fingers, her face lighting up as she revealed the exact model I had bought for myself. My model, my gift, my money. How did you even, the words tangled in my throat. "We saw it in your car when you pulled up," my mother said lightly, as though it explained everything. "You already have tools for your job. Sophie has more potential in this area anyway. It makes sense for her to have it." My father nodded in agreement, proud of his own logic. Sophie barely looked at me, too busy admiring what was stolen from me right in front of my eyes. It wasn't just about the tablet. It was about years of being told I was less important, less talented, less worthy. Tonight, that message wasn't implied, it was spoken out loud, cruel and clear. I felt the blood drain from my face, my chest tightening, as if all the oxygen had been sucked from the room. But no one noticed. No one cared. I didn't argue, I didn't shout, I didn't even cry. I simply stood up, pushed back my chair, grabbed my coat, and walked out. Behind me, my father's voice followed, sharp and impatient. "Don't be so sensitive, it's just a tablet, you can buy another one." I paused at the door, looking back one final time at the people who had raised me. My father's irritation, my mother's blank confusion, my sister's smug satisfaction. And then I left. I drove into the night, tears streaming silently down my face, and something inside me shifted forever. The fragile thread of hope that one day my parents might see me, value me, love me equally snapped. That was the night I decided I was done. Done trying to earn love in a house where it never existed for me. Done shrinking to fit into the role of the undeserving son. Done hoping they'd change. That night I chose myself. I didn't slam the door. I didn't scream. I just walked away into the night, into silence, into a new reality. That birthday marked the line between who I had been and who I was about to become. The drive back to my small apartment in Somerville felt endless. My headlights cut through the darkness, but inside me everything was hollow. For 25 years I had bent myself into knots trying to win the smallest scrap of recognition. Straight A's, late nights, studying, unpaid overtime, clean kitchens, and spotless grades. None of it had ever been enough. And tonight, my parents had finally said the words out loud. I didn't deserve anything. When I parked, the unopened tablet still sat in the passenger seat, the paper shining faintly under the streetlight. My hands trembled as I touched it. They hadn't just taken my purchase. They had stolen the joy of gifting myself something meaningful. And Sophie's face, that smug smile, was burned into my mind like a scar. I carried the box upstairs, placed it on my kitchen table, and stared at it. I knew I would never see it the same way again. What should have been a symbol of progress had been claimed by the very people who insisted I was less. That was the night I pulled out my phone, opened my contacts, and one by one deleted their numbers. My father, my mother, my sister, then social media, blocked, erased. I wasn't erasing them from existence, but I was cutting their access to me. The first few days were strange. My phone buzzed with missed calls, voicemails I didn't check. By day 4, the attempts slowed. By day 7, they stopped completely. No pounding on my door, no letters slipped under the mat, no frantic messages asking if I was alive. Their silence told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't essential to them. I never had been. And so a new decision crystallized in my chest: I would leave Boston. This city carried too many ghosts, too many memories of being invisible. I wanted a place where no one knew me as the lesser son. Somewhere I could build my own name, my own life without their shadow. That's when I started scanning job boards late at night. I didn't care about prestige or pay as much as I cared about distance. When an offer came from a mid-sized creative agency in Chicago, I barely hesitated. The salary was slightly lower, the role demanding, but the thought of being 800 miles away free, untethered, felt like oxygen. I gave notice at work, listed my apartment for sublease, and began packing. Not everything, just what mattered most: my laptop, my sketchbooks, clothes I could carry, and the few mementos from Grandma Eleanor, her old paintbrushes, her signed note with the words, "Your gift deserves proper tools." That sentence had carried me through years of neglect, and it would carry me again. I sold the rest: furniture, old electronics, even the dining table. Each item gone felt like cutting another string that tied me to a place where I had never belonged. 1 month after my ruined birthday, I loaded my car and started driving west. The first night in Chicago, I checked into a tiny rented studio in Wicker Park. The hardwood floors were scuffed, the walls bare, but the window overlooked a bustling street with cafes and bookstores. The anonymity was electric. Nobody here knew me. Nobody compared me to Sophie. Nobody measured me against a golden child standard. I could just be Daniel. I unpacked slowly, breathing in the smell of paint and dust. My first night alone in that new city, I lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling, a strange mix of fear and exhilaration coursing through me. I had no friends here, no safety net. But I had something even stronger: freedom. And here's where I'll pause just a second, because if you've ever had to stand up for yourself against family who took you for granted, you know this moment. The terrifying, thrilling split second when you finally cut the cord. If you've been there, or if you're still finding the courage hit, that, button, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and subscribe. Your story matters. And maybe by sharing it, someone else will find the strength to choose themselves too. That night in Chicago, the silence of the empty studio wasn't lonely. It was mine. And for the first time, I realized choosing myself wasn't selfish. It was survival. When people hear the word childhood, they often picture birthday balloons, family photos, and warm memories. Mine. It looked picture perfect from the outside: a white 2-story house, trimmed hedges my parents both respected at the local hospital. But inside those walls, the air carried a different weight, a divide no neighbor could see. From the moment my younger sister Sophie was born, something shifted. I was 4 years old, too young to understand why suddenly every whimper from her mouth brought my mother running, while my own needs were brushed aside with a "wait a minute." At first I thought this was normal. Babies needed more attention, right? But as years passed, the imbalance hardened into a pattern that would define our family. Sophie became the golden child. By kindergarten, she read above her level, charmed teachers, dazzled neighbors. Every refrigerator magnet was a Sophie achievement spelling, B's art ribbons, honor rolls. My parents basked in her light, bragging about her to anyone who would listen. And me, I was quieter, more reserved, happiest with a pencil in hand, sketching imaginary worlds. But in their eyes, art was not a gift. It was a weakness. "Why can't you be more social like your sister?" my mom would sigh, peering into my room where I drew alone. My dad would shake his head whenever he caught me sketching instead of studying algebra. Art won't get you into a good college, Daniel. Be practical. Their voices weren't cruel in volume, but the constant drip wore me down just the same. By the time Sophie turned 10, she got a shiny new bicycle with all the accessories streamers on the handles, a bell that rang like freedom. I remembered my own 10th birthday vividly, a hand-me-down bike from a cousin paint-chipped chain, squeaking handed to me without ceremony. At 12, Sophie was given her own computer for her room. I was still sharing the family desktop until I saved babysitting money to buy my own at 16. Christmas mornings became silent battles inside my chest. The tree sparkled with lights, but the pile of presents told the truth. Sophie's stack was twice mine, always bigger, always exactly what she had asked for. Mine socks, a planner, a gift card to the office supply store. Practical, forgettable. Each box was less a gift and more a reminder of where I stood, the afterthought child. But here's the irony: I tried. Hard. I studied until my eyes blurred, joined clubs I hated, just to look well-rounded, volunteered at school events. I thought if I played their game, they might notice. They didn't. The hierarchy was set. Sophie sparkled. I faded. There was only one person who made me feel seen, my grandmother Eleanor. She was my father's mother, a retired art teacher with silver hair and hands that always smelled faintly of cinnamon cookies. At her house 20 minutes away, I wasn't the forgotten son. I was Daniel the artist. She transformed her dining room into an art studio, walls lined with brushes, shelves crammed with sketchbooks. "You have a gift," she'd whisper as I painted beside her, classical music drifting through the air. For Christmas one year, she handed me my first professional set of drawing pencils, sliding them to me quietly while my parents admired Sophie's new gadget. "Your talent deserves proper tools." Those words sank deep, anchoring me in a world that kept telling me I wasn't enough. But back at home, the message never changed. When I was 17 and Grandma Eleanor died of cancer, it was like losing my only witness. At her funeral, while my parents hovered over Sophie, I stood by the casket alone and promised her silently, "I will keep drawing no matter what." That promise carried me to college on a partial scholarship for graphic design. Yet even then, coming home for holidays, the pattern never broke. Questions about my classes were perfunctory. Praise for Sophie flowed endlessly. At one point, I stopped hoping. I stopped expecting the scales to balance. And maybe you felt that too, growing up in a family where favoritism isn't shouted. But it's there in every glance, every gift, every ignored achievement. If you know that sting, let me know in the comments. Share your story. Because when we say these things out loud, we realize we're not alone, and that realization is powerful. Looking back, my childhood taught me one painful truth: love in my family wasn't unconditional. It was measured, weighted, doled out unequally. And in that imbalance, my identity was shaped not as the golden child, but as the one who learned to survive in the shadows. If my parents' house was the stage where favoritism played out, then my grandmother's home was the refuge where I finally felt like myself. Her name was Eleanor, and though she was small in stature, she carried a presence that filled the air with quiet authority and warmth. She had been an art teacher for decades before retiring, and when I stepped into her house, I could feel her devotion to creativity radiating from every corner. Every Sunday afternoon, I would bike the 20 minutes to her place. It wasn't just a visit, it was escape. While my parents compared me to Sophie and reminded me of my shortcomings, Grandma Eleanor sat me down in her sunlit kitchen and asked about my drawings. She never looked at me like I was wasting my time. She looked at me like I mattered. Her dining room had been transformed into a studio. Paint-splattered aprons hung on hooks, jars of brushes lined the windowsill, and unfinished canvases leaned against the walls. She gave me free rein over her supplies, treating me not as a child dabbling in crayons, but as an artist exploring his craft. The hours I spent there were the only times in my youth when I wasn't holding my breath, waiting for criticism. "You have a gift, Daniel," she told me once, her eyes glowing with certainty. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Those words pierced me deeper than she knew. Because at home, that was all I heard, that art was frivolous, a hobby at best, a distraction at worst. But here, across from her paint under my fingernails and the smell of cinnamon cookies drifting from the oven, my passion was validated. I wasn't the lesser child here. I was someone with potential. One Christmas when I was 14, she gave me a rectangular box wrapped in gold paper. Inside lay my first professional set of drawing pencils. They weren't cheap, and I knew she must have sacrificed something to buy them. She leaned close as I unwrapped the case, whispering, "Your talent deserves proper tools." My parents barely noticed, too busy watching Sophie show off her latest gadget. But I noticed. And I cherished every word. That small set of pencils became a symbol. Each time I touched them, I felt like I was holding on to proof that someone believed in me. My grandmother didn't dismiss my sketches as silly. She treated them like they were worth displaying, hanging them proudly on her walls, inviting her friends to admire them. It was in those quiet afternoons with her that I learned something essential. Identity isn't given by those who overlook you, it's built by those who see you. But the universe has a way of stealing away the few people who make you feel whole. When I was 17, Grandma Eleanor was diagnosed with cancer. The illness moved fast. Within months, she was gone. At the funeral, my parents comforted Sophie, patting her back, fussing over her tears, while I stood alone by the casket. I pressed my hand against the polished wood and made a promise I will keep creating no matter what. I won't let your belief in me die too. Her will left me her art supplies and a small savings bond to be opened when I turned 21. The note inside read, "For your dreams." To my parents, it was just money for textbooks. To me, it was sacred. It was her way of telling me to keep fighting for the life I wanted. That inheritance wasn't about dollars. It was about permission. Permission to believe that I was more than the shadow my parents cast me in. And maybe you've had someone like that too, a teacher, a coach, a grandparent. Someone who saw the spark in you when others only pointed out flaws. If you've ever had a person who made you believe in yourself, even for a moment, share it below. Their influence deserves to be remembered. When I think of my grandmother, I don't just see an elderly woman with a paintbrush. I see the scaffolding she built inside me. Without her, maybe I would have collapsed under the weight of constant comparison. With her, I found enough strength to keep drawing, to keep dreaming, to keep believing that one day I'd be free to define my own worth. The day we buried my grandmother was the day I learned what it felt like to lose not just a person, but the only anchor holding me steady. Standing beside her casket, surrounded by flowers and murmured condolences, I felt invisible in the very moment I needed to be seen the most. My parents hovered over Sophie, stroking her hair, whispering about how difficult the loss must be for her. But me, I stood there in silence, gripping the edge of the polished wood until my knuckles went white. I made a promise that day. I leaned down, whispered so quietly no one else could hear. "I'll keep drawing. I'll keep creating. I won't let what you gave me die." That vow was heavier than any prayer I'd ever spoken, because deep inside, I knew my grandmother's belief in me was the only thing keeping me from collapsing entirely. In the months that followed, grief mixed with determination. I filled sketchbook after sketchbook, pouring every ounce of pain into graphite and ink. My parents didn't notice, too wrapped up in Sophie's soccer tournaments and her plans for high school. But every page I completed felt like a secret rebellion, a reminder that I hadn't abandoned my grandmother's vision for me. When I turned 21, the savings bond she had left for me matured. I still remember sitting on my narrow bed in the dorms, unfolding the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was her note, "For your dreams." 4 words that carried more love than anything my parents had ever written to me. Most kids would have used that money for textbooks, groceries, maybe a new laptop. My parents even suggested I put it towards something practical, but I knew what she wanted. I walked into an art supply store and bought paints, brushes, canvases, real tools, not the scraps I'd always been given. Carrying those bags out into the street, I felt like I was carrying her faith on my shoulders. College became my escape. I had won a partial scholarship for graphic design, and suddenly I was surrounded by people who didn't scoff at creativity. They celebrated it. Professors encouraged me, classmates admired my digital projects, and for the first time I felt like I was in a place where art wasn't a weakness, but a language. Still, the distance from home didn't erase the patterns. Each time I returned for holidays, it was the same scene. Sophie's achievements on center stage, mine brushed aside. At Christmas, they'd ask how my classes were going, nodding absently while waiting for Sophie to finish describing her latest award. I'd sit at the dinner table spooning mashed potatoes, telling myself not to expect more. But something had shifted in me since the funeral. I no longer begged for scraps of validation. I had promised my grandmother I would keep going, and that promise was louder than their silence. One memory stays sharp. During sophomore year, my college hosted an art show. I invited my parents, hoping maybe this time they would come. The morning of the exhibit, my mother called. "We can't make it, Daniel. Sophie has a cold, and we need to stay home with her." She was 18, old enough to pour her own soup. That night, as I stood in the gallery, surrounded by families cheering for their children, I felt a familiar hollowness. But instead of crumbling, I smiled. Their absence was painful, yes, but it was also clarifying. If their approval was impossible to earn, then I didn't need it. That realization was strangely freeing. I could live for myself. I could honor my grandmother's legacy not by proving my parents wrong, but by proving myself right. And maybe you've had to make that kind of promise too. Have you ever sworn to someone you loved and lost that you'd keep going no matter what? If you have, tell me in the comments. Those promises shape us more than any praise ever could. From that day at the funeral onward, I knew my path wasn't about becoming the son my parents wanted. It was about becoming the artist my grandmother believed I already was. Growing up in Sophie's shadow wasn't a single event. It was a lifelong pattern, a slow drip of reminders that I was never enough. Even when I tried my hardest, the scales never tipped. By high school, I was on the honor roll every semester. I joined clubs I didn't care about, signed up for debate even though I hated public speaking, helped with chores without being asked. I thought that if I stacked enough good points, my parents would finally notice me. But the applause was always for Sophie. She was the star forward on her soccer team, the one teachers called a natural leader, the daughter my parents couldn't stop bragging about. Dinner conversations revolved around her. "Sophie scored 2 goals today. Sophie's teacher says she has what it takes for an Ivy League. Sophie's project got selected for the school showcase. My achievements." A polite nod, a quick "that's nice," and then right back to Sophie. It was like living in a theater where she was the headline act, and I was just the stagehand sweeping the floor between scenes. But what made it worse wasn't just the favoritism, it was the subtle digs. My mom's sigh when she caught me sketching instead of studying Daniel art won't pay the bills. My dad's lectures about practicality, stop daydreaming. Sophie's working hard to make a real future. They didn't scream, but the message was louder than any yell I was not enough as I was. One night when I was 16, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. My dad's voice was low but firm. "Sophie's going places. Daniel, well, he'll figure something out." That sentence carved into me. Not because it was shocking, but because it confirmed what I already knew. And yet I kept trying. When I got into a statewide art competition, winning first place, I rushed home with my ribbon. My parents didn't come to the award ceremony because Sophie had a mild fever. My drawing hung in the principal's office for months, but at home, it was as if it never happened. That same year, Sophie turned 14. For her birthday, she got a car, an actual car, because she wanted to start driving lessons early. For my 18th, a $50 gift card to an office supply store. I smiled, said thank you, and later sat on my bed staring at the card. The unfairness pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. But here's the thing: that weight didn't crush me. It hardened me. Each dismissal, each overlooked success, each stolen spotlight, it all became fuel. I told myself, if I can't win their love, I'll at least win my independence. Still, the wound ran deep. I would lie awake at night wondering if maybe I really was the problem. Was I too quiet, too strange, too consumed by lines and colors when the world wanted numbers and trophies? It took years in therapy later on to realize this wasn't about me. It was about them and the toxic dynamic they had built. But back then, all I felt was shame. Shame for not being enough. Shame for wanting more, shame for resenting Sophie, even when I knew it wasn't her fault she was favored. And if you've ever been there, measuring yourself against someone in your own family, always falling short, you know that pain. Let me ask you, have you ever been made to feel like the afterthought, the backup plan, the one who never shined? Share it in the comments. Speaking it out loud is the first step to taking back your power. Looking back, those years weren't wasted, they were training. Every ignored award taught me resilience. Every slight taught me how to see the truth beneath the surface. And every moment I spent sketching in secret kept me alive inside a house where I felt invisible. Because even in the shadows of Sophie's spotlight, I was quietly building my own fire. and one day that fire would burn bright enough that no one, not even my parents, could ignore it. The night of my 24th birthday was the breaking point, but the weeks after were the real turning point. I woke up every morning with the same thought: I can't stay here anymore. Boston wasn't just a city. It was a cage built from every memory of being dismissed every Christmas morning when Sophie got double the gifts, every dinner table where my words disappeared under the weight of hers. So I acted. I polished my resume and sent out applications, not just locally, but anywhere far enough to put miles between me and the family house. My only requirement: distance, freedom, a chance to start over. When the offer came from a mid-sized creative agency in Chicago, I accepted almost immediately. The pay wasn't higher, the title wasn't grand, but the thought of being 800 miles away filled me with something I hadn't felt in years: oxygen. I started selling off furniture, boxing up clothes, and stripping my apartment down to bare essentials. What I kept could fit in my car, my laptop, my sketchbooks, the professional pencils my grandmother had given me, and a small envelope with her note, "For your dreams." I carried that note like armor. The day I pulled onto the interstate car packed to the roof, I felt more alive than I ever had. The road stretched out in front of me, a ribbon of possibility, and with every mile I drove west, the weight of my family's shadow grew lighter. Chicago greeted me with chaos, traffic, skyscrapers, noise, but also with anonymity. Nobody here knew I was the other son. Nobody compared me to Sophie. In this city, I was simply Daniel. I rented a tiny studio apartment in Wicker Park. The hardwood floors were scuffed. The heater clanked at night, but it was mine. No one barged in, no one took what belonged to me. I hung my sketches on the walls, something I had never dared to do at home, and each one felt like staking a flag into new territory. The first few months were lonely. I ate takeout on the floor, painted late into the night, and sometimes caught myself scrolling through old photos of my grandmother just to feel grounded. But loneliness wasn't the same as emptiness. It was the cost of building something real. Slowly, I began to form connections. My coworkers invited me to happy hours. I signed up for a local figure drawing class and met other artists who understood what it meant to lose yourself in creation. For the first time, I wasn't strange, I belonged. And in the middle of that, something unexpected happened. At a gallery opening hosted by a colleague, I met Thomas. He was tall, with kind eyes, and a quiet confidence that felt like steady ground. We started talking about the pieces on the wall, but soon the conversation stretched into our lives, our dreams. For the first time, I found myself opening up not to family, not to someone waiting to compare me to Sophie, but to a person who genuinely listened. That night, as I walked home, I realized something startling. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. But don't mistake this for a neat transformation. Chicago wasn't magic. The hurt didn't disappear overnight. I still woke some mornings with anger knotted in my chest, still questioned whether I had made the right choice. Yet each day in that little studio, each moment of independence layered over the wounds. If you've ever walked away from family, you know the silence can be deafening. But it can also be healing. If you're watching this, and you've ever started over in a new city, chasing freedom rather than approval, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories of people who chose themselves, because your courage deserves to be recognized too. Leaving Boston wasn't the end. It was the start of something entirely new. I didn't know it yet, but in that city of strangers, I was about to find not only freedom, but also love. Meeting Thomas wasn't some movie scene with fireworks and slow-motion music. It was simpler than that, almost ordinary, yet in its simplicity, it was life-changing. It happened at a gallery opening downtown, one of those events where people sip cheap wine from plastic cups and nod solemnly at canvases they barely understand. I was there because a coworker had a piece on display, and though I felt awkward in the crowd, I went to support her. I stood quietly studying a bold architectural print when a voice behind me said, "You see something different, don't you?" I turned and there he was, tall, well-dressed, but not flashy, with kind eyes that seemed genuinely curious. His name was Thomas, an architectural designer who had a knack for noticing details others missed. We fell into conversation easily. What began as small talk about shading and structure unfolded into hours of back and forth, our childhoods, our creative journeys, the ways both art and architecture are about building worlds that don't exist yet. For me, that conversation was a revelation. I was used to people tolerating my passion for art, smiling politely before steering the topic elsewhere. But Thomas leaned in. He asked questions. He wanted to know why I drew certain lines, why I favored certain colors. His interest wasn't performative, it was genuine. We exchanged numbers, and after a few coffee dates that turned into late-night dinners, I realized I was letting my guard down in a way I hadn't with anyone before. With Thomas, I didn't feel like I had to prove my worth. He saw it already. One evening about a month into dating, we sat in his apartment eating takeout. He shared stories about his parents, how supportive they'd been when he switched from engineering to architecture. I smiled, but something inside me cracked. The contrast was too sharp. Before I could stop myself, tears welled up. "What is it?" he asked, instantly attentive. And in that moment, I told him everything. The favoritism, the birthdays. The night my parents took the tablet I bought for myself and handed it to Sophie with the words, "You don't deserve anything." I poured out decades of pain, words tumbling like a dam had broken. I braced myself for what usually came after such confessions, the well-meaning advice. Family is family. Maybe you're exaggerating. You should try to forgive. But Thomas didn't say any of that. He reached across the table, squeezed my hand, and said, "They didn't deserve you, Daniel. You deserved better all along." It was the simplest validation I had ever received, and it undid me. For the first time, someone acknowledged that my pain was real, that my worth wasn't tied to Sophie's shadow. I cried, loud, messy, unrestrained. And Thomas didn't flinch. He just held me. From then on, I noticed something change in me. With Thomas by my side, I started taking bigger risks in my work, pitching ideas I'd once kept hidden, experimenting with designs that felt truer to me. My career began to flourish, not because I suddenly became more talented, but because I finally felt free to be myself. That freedom seeped into my personal life too. I cooked again, I laughed more, I began to imagine a future not defined by escape, but by growth. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. And maybe you know what that feels like the moment someone finally looks at you and says, "You are enough." If you've ever had that person in your life, someone who believed in you when you barely believed in yourself, subscribe. Because stories like this matter, and maybe one day, yours will help someone else find the courage to trust again. Thomas didn't fix me, but he showed me that I didn't need fixing. I only needed space to heal. And in that space, something new was growing, love, trust, and a sense of belonging I'd never thought I'd find. It's strange how freedom doesn't arrive with fireworks. It creeps in quietly, like sunlight edging through blinds after a long night. By the time I had been in Chicago for a year, I began to notice it everywhere. I no longer clenched my jaw when I introduced myself. I no longer flinched at the word family. And I no longer carried the constant question, "Am I enough?" Thomas's presence helped, yes, but it wasn't only him. I had started therapy with a specialist in family trauma. In those sessions, I spoke truths I had never dared say aloud. My therapist looked me in the eye and told me words that seemed so simple, yet felt revolutionary. "Daniel, what you experienced was emotional abuse." At first, I recoiled. Abuse. That word felt too heavy, too extreme. But as she unpacked the definition, consistent favoritism, neglect, dismissal of achievements, gaslighting my needs, I realized she was right. I had spent years blaming myself for not being lovable enough, but the truth was harsher. And liberating. I had been raised in a system designed to break me. That realization didn't just validate my pain, it gave me permission. Permission to stop chasing what would never be given. Permission to set boundaries without guilt. Permission to accept that walking away wasn't betrayal, it was survival. Work mirrored this growth. Freed from the invisible chains of comparison, I thrived. Clients began asking for me by name. I took creative risks that would have terrified me back in Boston. Within 18 months, I was promoted to senior designer with a raise that made me catch my breath. Each paycheck wasn't just money, it was proof. Proof that I had value, that I wasn't the afterthought I'd been told I was. And then came the house. I had saved, relentlessly driven, partly by discipline, partly by hunger to own something no one could take from me. By 27, I signed papers on a small bungalow in Ravenswood, a 2-bedroom, nothing fancy but mine. Every wall I painted, every shelf I built, every sketch I hung, it was like laying bricks in the fortress of my independence. I would sit in the living room some evenings, Thomas by my side, coffee steaming, and just breathe. This was what freedom tasted like. But healing isn't a straight line. Some nights I still woke sweating, hearing echoes of my father's voice. You don't deserve anything. Some mornings I felt that old pull to prove myself, to beg for their approval. Trauma leaves fingerprints you can't scrub away. That's why therapy mattered. That's why love mattered. That's why choosing myself over and over mattered. Because healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about refusing to let the past dictate my future. And here's where I'll leave you with a question. Have you ever carried wounds from your family into adulthood? Scars that made you doubt your worth long after you left home? If you have, hit that like button and stay with me. Because what happened next in my story will show you that sometimes, even when you think the past is behind you, it comes knocking again. Yes, literally. Because 3 years after I walked away, 3 years after the birthday betrayal, 3 years after deleting their numbers and erasing them from my life, they found me. They drove 800 miles, stood on my front porch in Chicago, and demanded the one thing I had built with my own hands, the one place I finally felt safe, my house. And the audacity of their demand would test everything I had learned about worth, boundaries, and freedom. It was a quiet Sunday morning in April when the knock came. I was sitting on the porch, swing coffee in one hand, sketchbook in the other, planning a new series of illustrations. The world felt calm, ordinary. Then I looked up and saw a rental car pull to the curb. And out stepped 3 ghosts I had buried years ago: my father, my mother, and Sophie. For a second I thought I was hallucinating. My stomach lurched and my grip on the mug tightened until I nearly dropped it. They hadn't called, hadn't written, hadn't even tried for 3 years. And now here they were, walking toward me as if nothing had happened. Daniel, my father, said, his voice carrying that same tone he used when calling me in for chores as a kid. There you are. I froze. What are you doing here? Is that any way to greet your family? My mother scolded gently, her arms opening as if she expected a hug. I stepped back. They didn't wait for permission. Within moments, they were inside my house, wandering through the living room, peering into my kitchen, Sophie trailing behind them with wide eyes. Small but nice, my father muttered, scanning the space. My mother examined my shelves with faux admiration, while Sophie's gaze sharpened, landing on every corner like she was appraising what she might claim. Finally, my father clapped his hands together. Let's get down to business. My mother softened her face into that manipulative mask she wore whenever she wanted something. Sophie has some news, she said, turning to my sister. Sophie placed a hand on her stomach. That's when I noticed it, the bump. I'm pregnant, she announced, watching my face. Congratulations, I managed, still unsure why this news had been delivered on my doorstep. Then the hammer fell. She needs a stable place to raise the baby, my mother said. Our house is too small, my father added. No room for a nursery. And then, as casually as if he were asking me to pass the salt, my father said, This house should be Sophie's. You're just one person. She deserves it more than you do. I stared at him, my ears ringing. This is my house, I said slowly. I bought it. I worked for it. It's mine. Family supports? Family? My mother countered, her tone sharpening. You've always been selfish, Daniel, always thinking only of yourself. From the hallway, Sophie called out, This smaller room would be perfect for the nursery. I'll need to repaint, though. That green is hideous. Something in me snapped. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with fury. They had driven 800 miles not to apologize, not to reconnect, but to strip me again of what I had built, just like they had taken that tablet years before. At that moment, Thomas walked in back from his cycling group. He stopped short, eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. Everything okay? He asked, moving instinctively to my side. These are my parents, I said flatly, and my sister. They were just leaving. We're discussing how you'll let Sophie have this house, my father corrected, eyeing Thomas dismissively. Family business. Thomas's hand found mine. Anything that concerns Daniel concerns me, he said calmly. My father's lip curled, always hiding behind someone. First your grandmother, now this guy. The mention of Grandma Eleanor lit fire in my chest. How dare he speak her name when he'd never respected what she meant to me? My mother stepped forward, voice dripping with condescension. Be reasonable, Daniel. You've always been difficult. Just think about someone else for once. And here's the truth, 3 years ago I might have folded. I might have let them steamroll me, left my own house just to avoid confrontation. But not anymore. Not after therapy, not after Thomas. Not after everything I had built from the ashes of their neglect. I squared my shoulders, looked them dead in the eyes, and said the words I had been holding back for a lifetime. Sit down, all of you. It's time you listened to me. They looked stunned when I told them to sit down. My father's brows furrowed, his mouth opening to bark something sharp, but my expression must have stopped him. For once, the authority in the room wasn't his. Reluctantly, they lowered themselves onto my couch, Sophie fidgeting with her hands as if she'd rather be anywhere else. I dragged over a chair and sat facing them. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears, but my voice was steady. For as long as I can remember, I began this family has lived with a hierarchy. Sophie at the top, the golden child who could do no wrong. You two in the middle basking in her glow, and me at the bottom, the afterthought. My mother opened her mouth, but I raised my hand sharply. No, this time you don't interrupt. You're going to hear me. I watched them shift uncomfortably. My father's jaw tightened. My mother crossed her arms. Sophie bit her lip. When I was 7, I won first place in the school art contest. My drawing hung in the principal's office for months. Neither of you came to the ceremony. Why? Because Sophie had a cold. Their faces flickered, but I didn't stop. When I was 12, I saved up for months to buy you an anniversary frame. You gave it to Sophie so she could use it for her soccer photo. When I was 16, I made honor roll every semester. Do you even remember? Or were you too busy talking about how Sophie was the most popular girl in her class? I leaned forward, my words cutting sharper now. For Sophie's 14th birthday, you bought her a car. For my 18th, a $50 gift card to an office supply store. Do you see the pattern, or do you want me to keep going? My mother's face flushed. My father scoffed, muttering, "We treated you both the same." Did you? I asked quietly. Because my memory is very different, and then came my 24th birthday. Do you remember that night? You took the gift I bought for myself with my own money and handed it to Sophie. And Dad, you said, "You don't deserve anything." Those words broke something in me. That was the moment I knew it would never change. I turned my gaze directly on Sophie. And you knew that tablet was mine. You saw it in my car. But you tore it open anyway, didn't you? You accepted it smiling, because that's what you always did. Take what was mine, because you thought you were entitled to it. For once, Sophie's eyes dropped. Her hands trembled slightly. I straightened in my chair. That night I walked out. And for 3 years, none of you called, none of you came looking for me. Not until now when you wanted something. My house. I pulled out my phone, opening a folder. Here are the mortgage papers signed by me alone. Here's the closing photo of me holding the keys. Here's the documentation that this house is mine, earned through my hard work. Not given, not stolen. Silence hung in the air, heavy as stone. So now I'll ask you, I said softly but firmly, what exactly have you ever given me that gives you the right to demand I hand over my home? No one spoke. My father's face reddened, his jaw working like gears grinding. My mother's eyes watered, but no words came. Sophie looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. This is my life, I continued. I've built something good here. A career, friendships, love, a home. And you want to tear it down for Sophie because you've always believed she deserves more. But that ends here. I stood up, signaling the conversation was over. You can either respect my boundaries or you can leave and never come back. The choice is yours. The room was electric with tension. My father sputtered. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. Everything you've done for me, I asked. Name one thing that wasn't about Sophie. Just one. He couldn't. My father's silence was almost satisfying. His lips moving, but no words coming out, as if the truth I had laid bare had knocked the wind out of him. My mother, however, wasn't done. She leaned forward, eyes glistening with rehearsed tears, and whispered, "We are your parents, Daniel. We gave you life. We put a roof over your head, fed you, clothed you. Doesn't that count for something?" Her words cut, but I had rehearsed this response for years without even realizing it. "Those are obligations, not gifts," I said evenly. "Any decent parent does those things. They're the bare minimum." Her face crumpled, but I didn't let it stop me. My father slammed his hand against the couch arm. "So that's it. You'll abandon your sister in her time of need, turn your back on family." I took a deep breath. "I'm not turning my back on anyone. I'm standing my ground. Sophie's pregnancy is not my responsibility. Her housing situation is not my problem to solve. You are her parents. If you believe she needs help, then help her yourselves. Stop demanding I sacrifice everything I've built just because you can't imagine Sophie going without." The words echoed in the room, sharp and final. That's when my mother shifted tactics, her tone sharpening with the old accusation she had thrown at me since childhood. "You've always been jealous of your sister." I shook my head slowly, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. "No, I've always been hurt. Hurt by the way you treated me compared to her. There's a difference." And then something unexpected happened. Sophie, who had been quiet most of the time, spoke. Her voice was soft, almost trembling. "Mom, Dad, maybe we should go?" Both my parents turned on her, shocked. My father's glare was almost comical in its intensity. "So you're taking his side now?" "I'm not taking sides," Sophie said, her eyes flicking between us. "But this is his house. We can't make him give it to me." Her words hung in the air like a thunderclap. For the first time in my life, Sophie wasn't echoing them, wasn't basking in their protection. She was acknowledging reality, and that flicker of recognition in her eyes, it was more powerful than I expected. I stood, walked to the front door, and opened it wide. "I think it's time you left." My father stormed past me, muttering curses under his breath. My mother paused, as if searching for one last manipulative phrase, but when she found none, she followed him. Sophie lingered, her hand resting protectively on her belly. "Daniel," she began. "Goodbye, Sophie," I said gently but firmly. She nodded, eyes lowering, and walked out. The door shut. The silence that followed was deafening but also liberating. My knees shook, adrenaline coursing through me, but inside I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time I had stood in front of them and refused to shrink. For the first time I had spoken every truth I'd swallowed. Thomas came out from the kitchen, wrapping me in his arms. "You were incredible," he whispered. I exhaled, leaning into him. I don't think they heard a word. "Maybe not today," he said, his voice steady. "But you spoke your truth. That matters." And he was right. That confrontation wasn't just about keeping my house. It was about reclaiming my voice. About showing myself that I didn't have to let their narrative define me anymore. I slept deeply that night, without nightmares, without replaying conversations in my head. For the first time in decades, I had no what-ifs. I had said it all. But I also knew this wasn't the end. The dynamic of my family had been cracked open, and cracks don't just disappear, they spread. Somewhere deep down, I sensed this battle wasn't over. And I was right, because just 2 weeks later an email arrived from Sophie. Subject line: "Can we talk?" The email from Sophie sat in my inbox for hours before I opened it. The subject line was plain, "Can we talk?" but it felt like a loaded gun. My first instinct was to delete it. For 3 years she had taken everything handed to her without question, including the tablet that broke me. Why should I give her the satisfaction of a reply now? But curiosity has a way of gnawing at you. That evening I clicked it open. Her words were short, almost timid. "Daniel, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I wouldn't blame you, but I'd like to meet just the two of us. No mom, no dad. Somewhere public. Your choice. There are things I need to say." I read it again and again. Part of me wanted to laugh, since when did Sophie want to say anything that wasn't about herself? Another part of me felt something else. Could it be guilt? Or maybe hope, the fragile kind you don't dare acknowledge? After talking it over with Thomas and my therapist, I agreed. I chose a coffee shop near my office, neutral territory, easy to leave if things went south. The day came. I arrived early, heart pounding. When Sophie walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the polished, confident golden child I remembered. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her clothes simple, her face drawn. She looked human. "Thank you for meeting me," she said softly, sliding into the seat across from me. I waited silent. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, as if drawing strength from its warmth. "I need to apologize," she began. "Not just for what happened at your house, for everything." My stomach tightened, but I said nothing. When you listed those things from our childhood, the frame, the bike, the art contest, I remembered them. I remembered Daniel. I just never let myself think about how it felt for you. It was easier not to question anything when I was the one benefiting. She took a shaky breath. "I always knew they favored me. I just convinced myself it was normal. Or that I deserved it." Her words were a punch I didn't expect. For years I thought she was oblivious, smug, even complicit. And now she was admitting she knew, at least on some level. I liked being the special one, she confessed, eyes watering. But as I got older, it became a cage. Every decision scrutinized, every achievement expected, never celebrated. When you left, all of their focus turned on me, and it was suffocating. For the first time I saw cracks in her golden child armor. She wasn't just my rival, she was also their product. Then she said the words I never imagined hearing. I didn't want your house, Daniel. That was all them. I went along because that's what I always did. Followed their lead. Took what they gave. But when you stood up to them, when you said no, it shook me. You were so clear, so strong. I realized I've never had that courage. I searched her face for insincerity, for manipulation, but what I saw was raw honesty. Do you think it's too late for me, she asked, her voice trembling, to stand up to them, to be my own person? Her question pierced me, because for years I dreamed of her asking that very thing. I leaned back, studying her. It's never too late. But it's not easy. It takes boundaries. And it takes walking away when they won't respect them. Sophie nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I want to try. For me. For my baby. I don't want her growing up feeling the way you did. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The girl who once tore open the wrapping on my stolen gift without a thought was gone. Sitting across from me was a scared young woman desperate to escape the same cycle that had scarred us both. And against all odds, I felt the faintest flicker of something I hadn't felt for my sister in years: compassion. Have you ever had someone you thought was your enemy suddenly show you a different side? Someone who forced you to question the story you've told yourself for years? Let me know in the comments, because sometimes the real twist isn't revenge, it's realizing your rival was also a victim. When I walked out of that coffee shop, I wasn't sure how to feel. Relief, skepticism. A cautious sort of hope. Sophie's words had cracked open something I thought was long buried. For years, she had been the face of my pain, the golden child who always got more, who never once paused to consider what it cost me. But sitting across from her that day, I didn't see entitlement. I saw a frightened young woman who finally realized the pedestal our parents had built for her was actually a cage. A week later, we met again. This time she came with a plan. I can't stay at Mom and Dad's, she admitted, pushing hair back from her tired face. It's too much. They're controlling everything: what I eat, what I wear, what doctor I see. They're turning this pregnancy into their project, and I can't breathe. Her voice cracked. I want out. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to slam the door on the conversation. Why should I save her now when she had never saved me? But another part of me, the part that still remembered being 4 years old, excited to have a sister, couldn't ignore her plea. I have a spare room, I said slowly. It's set up as my studio, but we could convert it into a nursery temporarily, but there would be boundaries. Her eyes widened. You'd do that after everything. Not for the Sophie who took what wasn't hers, I clarified. For the Sophie who's trying to change. We set ground rules. No contact with our parents in my home. No letting them show up unannounced. Shared responsibilities for bills and space. And most importantly, respect for each other as adults, not rivals. When she moved in, it was surreal. We carried her boxes past the threshold of my house, the house my parents had tried to claim for her. I half expected the walls to collapse under the weight of irony, but instead, something new took root. At first it was awkward. Years of resentment don't vanish overnight. She'd cook dinner, and I'd flinch, waiting for some sly comment. I'd sketch late at night and expect her to roll her eyes. But slowly, routines formed. She washed dishes while I prepped meals. I helped assemble the crib she bought with her own savings. We watched old black and white movies on Friday nights, discovering we shared the same dry sense of humor. For the first time, we weren't adversaries under our parents' roof. We were two adults trying to build something separate from the system that broke us. Of course, our parents didn't take it well. They called incessantly, leaving voicemails laced with guilt. My father accused me of stealing Sophie away. My mother sent long emails warning I was endangering the baby by keeping Sophie from their guidance. But the real shock came when Sophie didn't fold. With my support, she replied with a calm but firm email. I'm an adult. I'm making my own choices. Thank you for your concern, but I need space to prepare for motherhood on my own terms. I'll never forget the way her hands shook after hitting send, or the look on her face when she realized she had survived that moment. I've never told them no before, she whispered. It feels terrifying, but freeing. We laughed more in those months than we ever had as kids. Late-night talks turned into confessions. She admitted she had always envied me too, my independence, my quiet resilience, the way I could create whole worlds with just a pencil. And I admitted that I had hated her less than I hated the role our parents forced us into. It was messy, it was imperfect, but it was real. And maybe that's the strangest twist of all. The person I once blamed for my deepest wounds was becoming my ally. Have you ever had someone you never thought you could trust end up standing on your side? Drop it in the comments. Because sometimes healing doesn't come from revenge, it comes from rewriting the story together. 6 months passed, and in that time my life twisted in directions I never would have predicted. Sophie, once the untouchable golden child, was now my roommate, my co-chef, my late-night confidant. Together, we learned how to set boundaries not just with our parents, but with each other. And when our parents tried to claw back control with surprise visits and manipulative calls, Sophie surprised me most of all. She stood firm. I remember one Saturday morning vividly. Our parents showed up unannounced, pounding on the door, demanding to check on the baby. Before I could even get up from the couch, Sophie marched to the door, cracked it open, and said firmly, "You need to call before visiting. This is our space. Respect it." The look on Dad's face, shock, disbelief, rage, was priceless. He stormed away muttering while Mom fussed with tears, but Sophie didn't budge. When she closed the door, she leaned against it shaking, then started laughing. "I think I broke their brains," she said. And for the first time, I laughed with her, not at her. Our bond grew as her due date drew closer. We spent evenings painting her new apartment together, a modest place just a few blocks from mine. She wanted independence, but she also wanted me close. "I don't want to raise my daughter the way we were raised," she told me one night, brushing paint across a nursery wall. "I want her to know she's loved for who she is, not for what she achieves or how she compares." And then everything changed. 3 weeks before her due date, Thomas surprised me. He cooked dinner, lit candles, and after dessert he knelt beside me and held out a velvet box. His voice shook with emotion. "Daniel, watching you stand your ground, rebuild with Sophie, and finally embrace who you are, it's made me love you even more. I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me? The ring was simple but perfect, an emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds. My answer came instantly. Yes, absolutely yes. Sophie was the first person we told, and she screamed so loudly I thought the neighbors might call the cops. Tears streamed down her face as she hugged us. "My baby and I will be your biggest fans," she promised. 2 days later, Sophie went into labor. It was 3 a.m. when she knocked on my bedroom door, her voice calm but urgent. "I think it's time." Thomas and I rushed her to the hospital. Hours blurred into contractions. Hand squeezes whispered encouragement. 14 hours later, I held my niece, for the first time, a tiny, perfect baby girl. Sophie looked at me, tears shining in her eyes. "Her name is Eleanor," she whispered, "after Grandma." The weight of that moment nearly crushed me. Holding that child named after the only person who had truly seen me as a boy, I felt the past and future collide. I kissed Eleanor's forehead and promised silently, "You will never feel invisible. Not in my presence. Not in this family we're building." In the months that followed, Sophie thrived. She settled into her apartment, balancing work and motherhood with a strength I had never seen in her before. We spent weekends cooking together, watching old movies, and taking Eleanor on long stroller walks. Our parents still tried to insert themselves, but Sophie held firm. "I need to do this my way," she told them once, and to my astonishment, they listened at least enough to step back. As for me, life expanded in beautiful ways. My career soared. I became art director at my agency, mentoring young designers the way my grandmother once mentored me. I planned a spring wedding with Thomas, a small ceremony in a garden with only those who truly mattered, including Sophie and baby Eleanor. Looking back, I realized something profound. The night my parents stole that tablet from me, I thought they were taking my dignity, my worth. But what they really gave me was freedom. By shoving me out of their world, they forced me to build my own, and in that world I found love, purpose, and even a renewed bond with the sister I once believed I had lost forever. And if you've ever had to set boundaries with your family, if you've ever walked away to save yourself, know this, you are not alone. Sometimes walking away isn't abandonment. Sometimes it's the first step toward the life you deserve. If this story speaks to you, don't just leave quietly, hit subscribe, share it with someone who needs courage, and keep walking your path. Because freedom begins the moment you choose yourself. When I look back on everything, the birthdays overshadowed the stolen gifts. The years of silence, I no longer feel just anger. I feel clarity. Those moments didn't define my worth. They revealed my resilience. My parents' favoritism shaped my childhood, but it didn't shape my future. Every step I took away from their control brought me closer to the life I was meant to live. A life where my art is valued, where my love is honored, where my home is mine, not because someone gave it to me, but because I earned it. And Sophie, my sister, who once represented everything I resented, has become proof that cycles can be broken. She chose differently for her daughter. She chose independence. And in choosing that, she gave me something I never expected, a real relationship between us, built not on rivalry, but respect. As for Eleanor, my niece holding her in my arms, reminded me why all of this mattered. She will never grow up doubting her value the way I did. She will know that love is not something you compete for, it's something you are worthy of by existing. Sometimes walking away from family feels like betrayal. But I've learned it can be an act of love for yourself, and sometimes even for the family you leave behind. Because in walking away, you create space for something healthier to grow. So if you've ever stood at that same crossroads, stay and be diminished, or walk away and risk being alone, let me remind you, choosing yourself is never selfish. It's survival. It's freedom. And in that freedom, you may just find the life you've been longing for all along. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find family in places you never expected.